So you just started teaching for the first time, or maybe this is your second or third year, and you're starting to wonder what you should be focused on over summer to prepare for back to school season. My first year of teaching, I spent hours researching cute Pinterest classroom themes and organization tips, but when the first week actually started, I felt super behind because in those first few teacher work days, were nothing but meetings. So I didn't actually have time to set up my classroom or to plan for the first week like I had hoped. And I felt behind on planning before the school year had even started. I also spent all day those first couple weeks putting out fires because I had no idea how to create good classroom management from day one. So, if this is something you can relate to, do not worry because today we're going to be talking about what most first year teachers do during the first week of school and what successful ones actually do to get ahead and to be prepared over summer break. So, with that being said, let's dive in.
Hey, teacher bestie. My name's Helena, and I'm the creator of the Present Teacher Podcast. I'm a first year teacher coach, and in this podcast, you are going to learn everything from simple, actionable classroom management, social emotional learning, and teacher wellness strategies. You know that impact you want to make in the classroom? Well, we're going to make it happen here.
So, before we dive in to what actual teachers or teachers who are being prepared are actually doing to get ready over summer break, we're going to dive into some common summer mistakes first year teachers make prepping for back to school season. So, the first thing that I commonly see is that they focus on decor. Now, back to my personal story, when I first started teaching that first year, I spent my entire first summer making a Pinterest perfect travel themed classroom. However, I quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing, and I spent the entire time focused on the wrong things. While yes, creating a classroom that you love and that you feel comfortable in, and that your students can be loved and be comfortable in and be proud of, is important, it doesn't need to be perfect from day one. So that's one of the biggest mistakes is just solely focusing on decor. I literally spent all 8 weeks of summer focusing on setting my classroom, and I spent little to no time focusing on other aspects of the classroom and teaching. So, again, huge, huge mistake I personally made. A second mistake often teachers make when it comes to preparing over summer is feeling pressure to buy everything from day one. So, my first year, I didn't have a lot of money to buy or get everything for my classroom because I had just, first off, graduated. And second off, I was moving from New Mexico to, or from Oregon to New Mexico. So I spent my entire savings account paying for my then boyfriend, now husband at the time, um, to move. And so that meant I had little that less than $100 honestly to my name. So I didn't have a ton of time or a ton of resources or money to spend on my classroom. So that year, I just didn't focus on that. The second year, I switched grades and districts, and I got things I wanted decor wise and classroom wise over time. And that was so much better of a school year and summer because I didn't have the added pressure of trying to come up with the money and set up a perfect classroom from day one. In that second classroom slash grade level slash district, actually I had a Harry Potter classroom, which I really, really loved. And what I ended up doing is I would just pick one, maybe decorative piece a month, and I would purchase that, invest that, and bring it into my classroom. So again, that took the pressure off of having to have a Pinterest perfect classroom from day one, and I just added it over time, making that $20, $30 purchase no big deal. And again, I did the same with my classroom things like my classroom library. I didn't start off with a huge classroom library, I just added as I went. And I went from having only a couple books to having a pretty big classroom library that I absolutely love and my kids love. So don't be afraid to add over time or don't feel the pressure to buy everything from day one. The third mistake I often see new teachers make when it comes to setting up their classroom is they're not focusing on classroom management. The thing is, it's so tempting and easy to focus so heavily on decor and classroom setup that you don't intentionally come up with a classroom management plan over summer. And so, with that in mind, ask yourself, how are you going to get students to follow expectations once school starts? How will you introduce them the procedures and expectations? And when will you introduce the procedures and expectations? What happens when students don't follow the expectations? These are all things you should really focus on and think of before the school year even starts. The last mistake I see a lot of teachers make when it comes to setting up their classroom is leaving the planning for the teacher work days. As I mentioned earlier, this was a mistake I personally made. I left all my planning for the first week of school for the teacher work days because in my mind I'm thinking, okay, my co-teacher will be there or my, team will be there so we can sit down and plan. And surely I'm going to have enough time to get everything done, stuff like that during those days. But what I didn't realize is a majority of those teacher work days are actually meetings. In fact, I think out of the how many years I've taught, I think the most I've gotten is maybe 1/2 day out of all those teacher work days to actually work in my classroom. And even then, typically that's when site-wide principals or admin have a meeting. So it wasn't even really a half day. But if I were to add up all the time, I'd say about a half a day. So that's not really a lot of time. And you might be tempted to leave planning for the first teacher work days. But a majority of the time, like I said, those are reserved for mandated meetings that they're required to have. So make sure you're being mindful of not leaving too much for those teacher work days because the reality is you may not actually have as much time as you think. So those are the top mistakes I see a lot of teachers make when it comes to setting up for the summer. So now let's talk about what successful teachers do during the summer to get ahead and to set a strong foundation for an amazing school year. So the first thing that they do is they focus on systems over stuff. So they focus on classroom decor and setup for 1 week in the summer, and then they spend the rest of the summer on creating systems, automating their classroom. This could be things like classroom management, family communication, grading, digital and physical organization. These are all important pieces to being a teacher and to having systems that are automated that will make it easier as the school year goes on. So, coming up with classroom procedures is one of the huge things that in classroom management you might want to look at over the summer. And if you are interested in seeing which classroom procedures I use in my classroom, make sure to check out my classroom procedure slides. They have all of the procedures I teach in a year. They're done for you so you can actually see how I personally teach them and how I model them to my students to teach them so it's automated throughout the school year. And like I said, even if you just want an idea on what that looks like, make sure to check out the description of my classroom procedure slides because I actually list out all 40 something classroom procedures I teach in a year to give you some ideas. Another thing you might want to think about is how will students transition from one activity to another? I utilize songs to get my students to transition from one activity to another. That way, by the middle of the year, I have a classroom job where somebody actually plays the song that gets my students to transition from one thing to another. Granted, all the songs are different. For example, there's a different transition song for lighting up versus coming to the carpet. But as I was saying, I have a classroom job to do that. That way, if I'm in the back working one-on-one with a student, my teacher helper can have my classroom move on without me, and I don't even have to be there. So using transitions, um, thinking about how will you have your students transition from one thing to another is really, really important. And how can you automate that so it's seamless? The second thing that successful teachers do over summer is they focus on communication over cute. Create a way to consistently communicate with families. Now, families are extremely important, and I know as a new teacher, I was extremely terrified of talking to them. I was terrified they were going to be mad at me because I was really shy, and frankly, I do much better speaking to children and students versus adults. So, coming up with a way to be consistent with your family communication and to create positive relationships from day one and make a good first impression is going to be really important to having a very successful and supported school year. So, One way you can do this is you can either create or maybe purchase some newsletters or templates. I personally liked sending a weekly newsletter to my families, letting them know what to expect that week, what we would be working on, any announcements, and things like that. If you want some ideas on what this can look like, make sure to check out my newsletter templates to kind of give you an idea of what I mean in regards to how the layout is, but sending some form of whether it's weekly, monthly, semi-weekly, some form of consistent communication is going to help your family stay up to date and current what's going on in the classroom and to eliminate misunderstandings happening in the classroom. And the next thing that I highly recommend you do for the communication over cute is those teachers focus on plan meet the teacher night strategically. Meet the teacher night, back to school night, family night, whatever you call it. This is an ideal time to set a really good first impression for families to really get an idea and a sense of who you are as a teacher and how you're going to show up for your students. I'm going to be honest, I didn't dedicate nearly enough time to my meet the teacher night the first year or two, and I strategically found ways of how to do so. I actually have a ton of resources on this in my TPT store for ideas, including my Meet the Teacher slides and back to school forms. So if you want to see what I do in my classroom to kind of spark some ideas, make sure to check out the description where you can kind of get an idea of what this could look like. The third thing that teachers focus on over the summer to get ahead is flow over fluff. When you intentionally create a classroom flow, you're preventing a lot of disruptive behavior from happening in the first place. A great example of this is when I first started teaching, I had no rhyme or reason to my classroom. I had areas that were next to each other that made no absolute sense. I had materials spread throughout the classroom. And so what would happen was my students, whenever they needed something where we were transitioning, would get up and talk to their friends or use this as a time to get off task. But once I intentionally created a classroom flow and came up with a strategic place to put all the materials, it pretty much cut those disruptive behaviors in half, if not three-quarters of the way. So make sure you are intentionally creating a classroom flow that prevents disruptive behavior from occurring in the first place. Set up ways Another thing you might want to do is set up ways to organize your digital and physical paper resources to save time on planning in the future. I personally like to create a paper flow and a digital flow, meaning what do I do whenever I get a piece of paper? What are the different touch points it's going to meet all the way to being filed away for later? Same with the digital resource, whether it's from an email, whether I purchase it, whether it's from my curriculum, how am I going to take that through the entire process of download to saving it for later? And the last thing is to implement classroom management like classroom jobs to have or clear procedures and expectations so that your classroom runs for you so you don't have to pause and put out fires the entire time. All of these things are different ways that you focus on flow over fluff and really get to the nitty gritty and the foundational pieces that are going to automate your classroom. The last thing that new teachers or first year teachers are focusing on over the summer to actually have a really good school year is to focus on one thing at a time. Instead of focusing on your entire summer on all the things or on setting up a cute themed classroom, pick one focus each week. This is one of my tried and true schedules that I like to use. In fact, it's something that we cover inside my program, Classroom Kickstart. Each week, we focus on a different topic, and I walk them through the teachers that go through through the entire process on how to set up their classroom in just 4 weeks. So this is what a schedule or that schedule looks like. So week one, we focus on the layout and decor. We focus on the classroom flow. What does it look like and sound like and feel like for a student to walk in? Where are the different areas they are going? How are we moving stuff around to minimize disruptive behavior? And then can we come in with a plan to when our classrooms are finally ready to set up our classroom in a way that it doesn't take the entire summer, but if anything, it takes a day or two tops. The second week, we focus on classroom management, coming up with that foundational classroom management plan. Things like classroom procedures and expectations, what to do when students aren't following expectations, stuff like that is really going to go a long ways when it comes to automating our classroom and making it so you're preventing disruptive behavior from happening in the first place instead of having to put out fires the entire first month of school. Week 3, we focus on communication. We focus on that positive communication, not just with families, but also with admin and staff. How are you setting a good first impression with families? How are you preparing for Meet the Teacher Night? And what resources can you use to create a seamless process for that? Week 4 is paper and digital flow. How can we set up systems that will keep the clutter to a minimum? No desk covered in papers, no emails with over 1,000 emails on it. How can we organize it so that it's clear and prepped and ready to go for the new school year? So that wraps up everything you need to know in regards to what most first year teachers prepare over summer and what successful ones are actually doing to prepare over summer. So, as a quick recap, the first thing we talked about is what first year teachers normally do to prepare for the school year. First thing they do is they focus on decor. They solely focus on making their classroom cute when in reality, there's so much more to a classroom than that. The second thing is feeling pressure to buy everything from day one instead of adding over time and making our classroom more and more like you and at home over time. The third thing is not focusing on classroom management. They focus on creating and setting up their classroom, but they completely miss classroom management so much so that that first week they feel like they're just constantly putting out fires. The fourth thing is leaving planning for the first couple teacher work days only to be disappointed when a reality is maybe that district is going to require you to be in a lot more meetings and not have as much time as you thought. Now, that's the first thing we talked about. The second phase we talked about is what the pros actually do to prepare for the school year over the summer. The first thing is they work on systems over stuff. Second thing, they do communication over cute. Third thing, flow over fluff. And fourth thing, one thing at a time. So that wraps up everything in regards to how to prepare over the summer. I'm going to give you some next steps if you want to dive further into this classroom setup, back to school tips and tricks and strategies. The first thing is wherever you're tuning in from, I have a ton of free content now. I have well over 150 weeks worth of content. So make sure to go check them out. I'm sure I've covered a ton of topics and probably answered a lot of your questions in regards to preparing for back to school season. So make sure to check that out. The second thing is to download my free classroom setup guide. This is a guide where I took the top 10 questions I most commonly asked about setting up your classroom, including what are my must-haves, what are my avoids, my flops, how to set up your classroom, how to create a flow, all of those things, how to prepare for Meet the Teacher Night. All of those things I prepared ahead of time. I answered them, and then I went and made weekly content for. I'm talking YouTube videos, podcasts, and blog posts. And then I answered each question in a guide. I gave a brief answer to each question, and then I linked to those podcasts and YouTube videos so you're not sifting through my tons and tons of content looking for your answer. It's all linked for you, so make sure to go check that out. The third resource I have for you is if you want me to send you all of my templates that I use for back to school to set an automated classroom over the summer so I don't have to worry about it, make sure to check out the classroom setup bundle. This bundle has well over 26 different templates, including newsletters, classroom procedure slides, meet the teacher night, classroom forms, labels. I mean, there's so much into this classroom setup bundle, so make sure to go check that out. Even if you don't necessarily want to access to mine, there's still a great starting point to come up with your own ideas on what it can look like to automate your classroom over the summer. And finally, the fourth and final resource I have for you, I talked about it earlier, but is my Classroom Kickstart mini course. This is the mini course that I talked about where we go and how to cover and how to set up your classroom in over 4 weeks, in 4 weeks or less. The reason I created this program is because I know how tempting it is as a teacher to spend your entire summer setting up your classroom, but the reality is I don't want you to have to do that. So I created a program that walks you through step by step, everything from figuring out what you need in your classroom, what are your must-haves, may-haves, and eventually will-haves, to creating a classroom flow, to creating a classroom management plan, to setting a good first impression with families, all the way to how to organize your digital and physical spaces. All of that I covered, and we have each focus each week, one focus each week, and I put it in one program. I love going through this program with a group of teachers every summer as I personally set up my classroom. So definitely make sure to check that out if you're wanting more of the strategy behind setting up your classroom over summer, especially if you're wanting to do it in 4 weeks or less. All right, that wraps up everything I have for you. Thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this content, I would love if you could either like or subscribe wherever you're tuning in from. And if you want to take it a step further, which of these strategies are you going to be using over the summer? Let me know in either the comments or send me a DM. I would love to chat. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I'll talk to you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye!
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I hope that you were able to take away some value that will help you thrive inside and out of the classroom. It would mean the world to me if you could take 5 seconds right now and leave a review on this podcast. And if you found this podcast especially helpful, make sure to take a screenshot of this episode right now and tag me on your socials to let me know you're listening. As always, remember that we are stronger together with all the love in the world. Helena, aka the Present Teacher. See you next time, Teacher Bestie.